Welcome back to the Physics of Faith podcast. I'm Tim.
I'm Tommy.
And we are in Mark chapter 13 today. We thank you for joining us again. If you've done the first 12 chapters with us, we appreciate it. We hope that you're continuing to read on your own, that you're not just listening to our commentary, but that you're looking at your additional commentaries and hopefully hearing what other people are saying about these scriptures, and also having active discussions in your church communities about these things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're glad that you're listening, and obviously we hope that we're bringing knowledge to you. But the best way to learn is to do, and so the best way to learn scriptures and to really understand them and to remember them is just be reading it yourself. You know, that's is great. At the end of the day, and we talked about this several times on here, no matter how many times we read something, we can always get something different out of it. Yeah. And it's amazing how many times I read something and I don't get it the first 10 times, and then all of a sudden, because I read something else somewhere else, I read it here, I'm like, oh, that's what that means, you know.
And doing it with somebody else also helps, because I can't think of how many times during the course of us, we've been doing this for a little over a year now.
Wow, it's been that long.
It's been that long. That like you'll say something about something that I've read before. I'm like, I didn't get that perspective before. Yeah. Because you've lived a different life than me, and you've seen some different things than I've seen.
For sure.
And you maybe caught a different commentary that I didn't catch.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, so it's good to do this together. All right, so we're going to read chapter 13, and we're going to start with just the first two verses. We're going to read verses 1 and 2, and we'll comment, and then we'll move on. All right, so Mark chapter 13, verse 1 and 2. As he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, look, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." All right. Meaty there.
Yeah.
We just wanted to point this out here. So the disciples were amazed at the works, by the work of the temple and the compound. I kind of think about this. Sometimes we maybe forget this, but like Jesus' disciples were kind of from the country. Yeah. You know, and this was the big city.
Yeah.
You know,
they were country bumpkins.
That's right. And so the temple was also known to be very beautiful, that it had gold plating in parts, that they used marble. Mm-hmm. And you know what? About 40 years after Jesus says this, the Jews revolted against Roman rule, and Jerusalem is destroyed, including the temple. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of interesting stories.
Save for one wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I may be jumping ahead here. No. I have a check mark next to this. Like, you know, okay, check, that's here, you know, and I've got it further down. You're like, okay, check, that's happened. Like you can read through Revelation and some of these other things and go, okay, check, that's that. Yep, check, that's that. That's happened. You know.
Yeah. You know what's interesting about it too is it's repetitive.
Yeah.
Like the destruction of the temple. Jesus prophesies the destruction of the temple. But the destruction of the temple was prophesied even before Jesus and happened even before Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? This is a rebuilt version of the temple.
Yeah.
You know, so like it's interesting when we then get into eschatology that we need to be aware that there are going to be things that mirror things that have already happened. And but also important that we not confuse the two, which is why we don't talk about eschatology, because it gets confusing. Yeah.
And because I don't even know what that means.
Yeah. It's another podcast for another time.
Right.
So there's some interesting stories about how the temple was destroyed, but it was destroyed 40 years after this. So Jesus did prophesy the destruction of the temple. All right, so he then continues to talk and teach, and we're going to read verses 3 through 13. As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew were questioning him privately. "Tell us, when will these things come about, and what will be the sign when all these things are going to be fulfilled?" And Jesus began to say to them, "See to it that no one misleads you. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and they will mislead many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Those things must take place. But that is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will also be famines. These things are only the beginning of birth pains. But be on your guard, for they will hand you over to the courts, and you will be flogged in the synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them. And the gospel must first be preached to all the nations. And when they arrest you and hand you over, do not worry beforehand about what you are to say, but say whatever is given you at that time, for you are not the one speaking, but it is the Holy Spirit. And brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will raise up against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by everyone because of my name. But it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved. All right. So we're gonna,
How lovely and beautiful.
yeah. So we're going to stop right there. I want to note real quick, though, that this is not the end of Jesus' thought. But we're going to break down some of what he said, and then we'll continue on.
Yeah, this is kind of a long kind of speech here, yeah.
Exactly. So the four, the Fab Four here of Jesus' disciples, they want to know more and understand what Jesus is talking about when he was like, "Hey, these buildings will be destroyed."
Yeah.
They're like, "Hey, well, when? Like,
yeah.
like, should we
Should
go?
we leave? Yeah.
And I think it's
Are
also,
you about to do something here?
yeah. There's also something to be said that we've talked about this before. There was kind of this idea that maybe he was going to lead in some type of government or kingdom there. Like, it was a triumphant march into Jerusalem, right? He's going to be the king of Jerusalem. And now you're saying this temple's going to be destroyed?
Yeah.
Like, so what do we need to know about? So Jesus tells them, he starts telling them about things like false messiahs. He uses the term wars and rumors of war. So there's going to be wars and talk of war. He talks about famines and earthquakes. And he says all these calamities are the beginnings of birth pains. And he tells the disciples that the gospel must be preached to all nations. He tells them that they will be persecuted and delivered up to their enemies for these things, right? So for them preaching, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, those first, like I said earlier, those first, 5 through 8, you can go, okay, check. Check. I mean, we record this well ahead of time, so I'm sure that this isn't over, but who knows what will happen between now and then. But it's literally happening right now, between what you're seeing over in Israel. I mean, God is not surprised by any of this, and really we shouldn't either. Like as heartbreaking as it is to see, you watch that and you hear about it and like, yeah, God said this was going to happen. And there's probably more to come, and it's probably going to get worse.
Right. And what's interesting is some of the stuff he said would happen also happened pretty quickly after that, right?
Yeah.
So like Acts 4:1-22, Peter and his friends are taken in front of the Sanhedrin, and he lets the Holy Spirit speak through him.
For sure,
right?
yeah.
And what's interesting is Jesus is saying these things are not the sign of the end times.
These are
the things that come before before the signs of the end times, right?
Yeah.
This is basically the state of the world from now until the end begins.
Yeah.
Right?
We're in labor.
Yes, exactly. He talks about brothers will be betraying brothers, and that people will hate them because they love Jesus. So that if you take on his namesake, I don't know, like the word Christian, people are going to hate you for that, right? And so like we shouldn't be surprised by the way people talk to us and people treat us. You know, it's been foretold.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't have a whole lot to add there. You said it well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. All right, so we'll continue his thought here. He's going to talk about something interesting here, verses 14-23. Now, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down, nor go in to get anything out of his house. And whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those women who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. Moreover, pray that it will not happen in winter. For those days will be such a time of tribulation as has not occurred since the beginning of the creation which God created until now, and never will again. And if the Lord had not shortened those days, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. And then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or look, there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will provide signs and wonders in order to mislead, if possible, the elect. But beware, I have told you everything in advance. All right, so the abomination of desolation is a reference to Daniel 11:31. And what this is, what this term describes, is a desecration of the temple specifically, right? So the idea is it's thought to be an idol so abominable, like so revolting, and it's set up in the place of the temple of Jerusalem that it brings desolation, which is the complete and devastating judgment of God. Right. So it is such an affront. It is something that is such an affront to God, being propped up and placed in His holiest places.
Yeah.
That brings a devastating judgment of God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't have a whole lot to add to that because obviously you went to Bible college, so you know way more about that stuff.
Well,
that's much more deeper than us. But and this is also one of those things that like Jesus purposely leaves it open because we're not. This is stuff for us not to know. I mean, it's talked about later. Like it will come like a thief in the night. You don't know what's happening. He's just kind of giving us a teaser and a warning. Like just so you know, it's gonna get rough.
Yes, absolutely. And it is interesting that he doesn't just simply say, well, in the year 52 AD, this will happen, and in the year 1940 X this will happen, and he gives imagery that requires us, much like he did with his parables, that we have to be vigilant.
Yeah,
it requires us to not just know that at this date this will happen, but to be in constant watching and in constant action, so to speak, that the end could be tomorrow.
Yeah,
right. We could see this tomorrow.
Yeah, it's a lesson against procrastination.
Yes,
I'll give my life to Christ tomorrow.
right.
Probably should do it now.
Probably today would be better. So he tells them that when they see this, they should run. Because it means that trouble is coming and persecution will occur that is beyond anything which you have ever seen. He says that it would be urgent, that you just need to leave behind anything that you have left behind. Like, don't go back for anything. And even talks about like how woeful it would be for a woman with a baby, or for a mother with a baby, or a woman who is pregnant, because it would slow them down and make this more challenging for them.
Yeah.
And then even talks about like and pray that it doesn't happen in wintertime, so you don't have to fight against the elements as well.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And he says, but as this is happening, other people will start coming back and saying, or coming around and saying, well, I am the Messiah.
Yeah.
Follow me. And even performing miracles, or giving them signs and attempting to mislead them. But he says to avoid them and to hold fast to what he has taught them.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I look at, and it's interesting to me. He says here in verse 19, unequaled from the beginning when God created the world. So try to picture in your mind God creating the world. Like, picture in your mind what the separation of the land and the sea looked like.
Do that right
now. Do that right now. It's real easy to do.
Yeah.
But just picture what all of that creation looked like, and how I don't even know a word for it.
The word that comes to mind is chaotic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be the exact opposite.
Yeah.
But equally as chaotic.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm sure you guys are following along great with some of this. These are some challenging passages, and if we had, maybe at some point we'll have to get into some of this, or maybe we'll do some bigger breakdowns of some of these thoughts, because you could write an entire book on the abomination of desolation, and talk about what Jesus is talking about, and which of these things have maybe already occurred and which have not, and all of those types of things. So,
and at the end of the day, though, even if you did, it's still fruitless, because even Jesus doesn't know when he's coming back.
Right.
Even the angels don't know.
At least he didn't. Yeah.
At that point, yeah.
At that time, yeah.
Yeah, so there's as you know, as much as interesting and fun as it might be to kind of pick that out, like, oh yeah, well here's that, because you can see things that have happened, and you've seen it in, you know, even in the Old Testament that there was prophecy. Like you see things that happen, like, oh well, there's something.
Yeah.
It still does matter. We're still not even gonna be close.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to be careful with trying to make predictions.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and finish the chapter here. We'll read verses 24 through 37. But in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers that are in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And he will send forth the angels and will gather together his elect from the four winds, from the end of the earth to the end of heaven. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. As soon as its branch has become tender and sprouts its leaves, you know that summer is near. So you too, when you see these things happen, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Watch out, stay alert, for you do not know when the appointed time is. It is like a man away on a journey who, upon leaving his house and putting his slaves in charge, assigning to each one his task, also commanded the doorkeeper to stay alert. Therefore stay alert, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening, at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, so that he does not come suddenly to find you asleep. What I say to you, I say to all, stay alert.
I kind of gave away the ending there earlier when I said like thief in the night. I'd forgotten that came out. This was after it.
It's all right. It's all right. All right. So just before his return and after the prescribed tribulation, so he describes like this tribulation that's going to occur, and then there's a cosmic sign that occurs in the heavens, right? Mm-hmm. And he describes something that's similar to what Old Testament prophecies describe. So we see similar language about about the sun being darkened, the moon not giving its light, the stars falling from the heavens, all that. We see that kind of stuff in Isaiah 13:9 through 11, Ezekiel 32:7 through 9, Joel 2:30 through 31, Amos 8:9 through 10, and Zephaniah 1:14 and 15. So this is apocalyptic language that the disciples would have been familiar with, mm-hmm. right? And then the Son of Man will come in the clouds with his angels and collect up the believers. Now the word he uses here is the elect, and he's used the word elect multiple times here. And I just want to, just for the record, notate that when we talk about elect, we're not using it in the Calvinist sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is those who have accepted Christ.
Yeah.
Not those that Christ has chosen to accept him.
Mm-hmm.
For it is God's will that all would come to know him. So just know that when we're speaking, we're not speaking in the Calvinist. We're not taking that to mean what a Calvinist might take that to mean.
Right.
Okay, so he then talks about the fig tree. It's interesting. He says, "Now learn from the parable of the fig tree." I immediately think back to the one he cursed.
You're right. Yeah,
but that's not what he's talking about. He says the flower, but he also kind of is just like the flowering of a fig tree. There are signs to what season we are in, and that fig tree that he cursed was showing the signs of it being in a specific season, but then didn't bear the fruit of that season.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, in that same way, you need to pay attention to these signs to know that we're near the end, right? And then he gets to this quote, and this is really, this one's interesting. He says, "This generation will not pass away before these things occur," right? This can mean really one of two things when he says this. So what we know he's not saying is he's not talking about the people sitting next to him.
Yeah.
What he means, he could mean one of two things. Either the generation that sees these signs will not pass away before mm-hmm. Christ comes.
Right.
or returns, or two, that the people of Israel or the Jewish people will not pass away before the end time. So
Yeah.
there are two schools of thought on that. Both seem very reasonable.
Yeah.
I would say dig deeper and find some really good theological books
Yeah.
if you want to go further on that.
Yeah, I mean the end times is so there's so much about it here in Mark and in Revelation and even in the Old Testament. So much prophecy and so much is written about it. And yet it's still hard to pinpoint exactly, because he talks about his elect. Does this come before that or does this come after that? And you could make a good case that it's this way, and you could make a good case that it's this way.
Right.
And then so many of those other things there. It's like the order and like, well, does this happen before this or does this happen? And it's very it's not a bad thing to learn, certainly.
Yeah.
But it's also something that we're not really going to fully understand it, and I think God wants it that way.
Right. Yeah. When I read this, I was like, oh, it happens after that tribulation. So I'm thinking, oh, so it's post-trib.
Yeah.
But then it's also like, but he's referring to this specific tribulation, meaning there are multiple tribulations.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So like there's some, there's a lot there.
Right.
And we're not going to cover that today.
No, that is a whole other series of podcasts.
Right. So then even as you had pointed out earlier, Jesus says, look, even I don't know the time that of the end. Only the Father knows, right? Now, this is an interesting statement because, we're Trinitarians, right? And we believe in the Trinity. And this is a common scripture that someone will take and misuse to try to argue against the Trinity.
Yeah.
Right. And so and I've heard this with different people who've said, well, Jesus wasn't God. They'll say that Jesus wasn't God. And I'll say, and this is proof of it.
Yeah.
Because if he was God, he would know what God is doing.
Yeah.
Right. And this misses the whole point or the nature of what the Trinity is. Right. It's the same God, but it's different persons.
Yeah.
And so the Father has things that he can know that the Son does not.
Yeah.
And you could say that maybe it's because that the Son has submitted to humanity at this point. He is he's put flesh on, so to speak.
Yeah.
So he has willingly limited his omnipotence.
Right.
In this person. Right. So it's not contradictory to say that Jesus doesn't know the time,
right,
and that Jesus is God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if so, yes, obviously Jesus is fully God, but he also prayed to his Father, and so was he talking to himself?
Yeah.
It's it's one of those things. Another thing, it's another thing that's probably a whole other thing for another podcast because it does get very technical. But and I heard another pastor at one time say, when he explains to his children, your mother and I are two individual people, but we are one.
Yeah.
It's not the exact same thing, but it helps you.
It helps you gain an understanding of maybe how it works in a practical sense, but at the same time, there's no good analogy for the Trinity.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because it's almost like the Trinity is a good analogy for everything else.
Yeah.
Right. Or for other things, because we can talk about being body, soul, and spirit,
right,
like those types of things, how we're almost a triune person ourselves. And you can use the Trinity as an example or as a thing, but it's outside of the scope of natural, right? So it's hard for us to put into context.
It's outside the scope of our own, obviously, knowledge, because when you think about everything that around us is God's creation. So the fact that there are words is God's creation.
Yeah.
The fact that our brain thinks things is God's creation.
Yeah.
And so everything about the universe itself is God's creation.
Yeah.
And he decided what we can understand and what we can't understand, and while we can listen and learn and follow as we should, there's just some things this side of heaven we just can't get,
Yeah. So at the end of this chapter, Jesus basically says, look, I'm going away. And I'm telling you to be watchful. I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling you to stay alert and be prepared for these things, because you don't know when I'm coming back, but you need to be ready for me to come back, right?
Yeah.
So, we need to pay attention. We need to stay alert. We don't need to be, doomsday preppers. We don't necessarily need to go buy our
Yeah.
bunkers, so to speak, but
Yeah.
we need to be looking for these signs and looking for those things. And here's the thing. I think he commands us to, so we need to be alert.
Yeah.
But I feel like the best way to be alert is to be vigilant in serving Christ.
Mm-hmm.
If we are doing the things the Bible teaches us to do, if we are living our life the way he teaches us to, if we are serving God, worshiping God, praying, and hearing his word, then we're going to be prepared.
Yeah.
And we're going to be alert.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be ready, right?
Yeah.
And so we'll be ready for those things when they come. But I think if we hyper-focus on the return of Christ,
Yeah.
we sometimes miss all the other aspects, all the other parts of what he's commanded us to do.
Yeah.
And we really need to be, we need the whole. We need all of the parts, not just one of the part, right?
Right. Yeah, it's like, you think about kids, like your mom tells you to do something, and you go over and you kind of do it, but you really not, but you have your other brother watch out. So it's, he's like watching, like, oh, she's coming. And then so you start doing it. Like, it's not like we're not supposed to have a watch out, to have one person watching out for the signs. And so that once he starts coming, we start,
Right.
my dad tells a story when he was young. So he has two brothers. He's the middle. And one day they were up playing on the roof of their house.
Oh, no.
And they saw their dad driving. So their dad was, my grandpa was a postman. And so they saw him driving, because obviously they were above the trees, and they saw his car coming down the road. And he pulled into the driveway and he walked in the house, and all three of them were sitting in the living room. And he said, I saw you guys up there.
Yeah.
And so they were watching out for their dad, but they were still doing something that they shouldn't have been doing.
That's right. They were on lookout, so they would know when to correct their behavior.
Exactly. Yeah. And they needed to, if their dad told them, hey, if my grandpa said, hey, rake the leaves, while I'm gone, it's not, do this, and then once you see that I'm coming, rake the leaves. It's be raking the leaves.
Be raking the leaves. And I would go further and say that in taking that and applying it to this, if we are not about the things of Christ, we won't be alert.
Yeah.
We won't see it coming.
Mm-hmm.
If we're waiting to see it coming to start doing something, we'll never see it coming.
Yeah.
Because we won't know the truth to identify the counterfeit.
Right.
So, all right. Well, that's the end of chapter 13. Any last thoughts, concerns, questions?
Yeah, I feel like so many of my answers in this episode where we don't know, we don't know, we don't know, we can't know, we don't know. I feel like everything, they're like, yeah, we don't know. It's hard to say. But that also just, I think that just shows God created us in a way for us to think about whatever it is.
Yeah.
But he didn't create us to know what it is. I mean,
it's just not the right time for us to have some specific understanding. Yeah. And I think some of these things there is understanding of.
Sure. Yeah.
We just didn't do the scholarly work.
Yeah.
And dive super deep into it.
Well, and even the scholars at the end of the day,
they don't agree on everything.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah,
it makes me feel like we're in good company with the disciples.
Right.
Because how many times was Jesus like, you guys don't get this?
Yeah.
All right. Mm-hmm. And he was teaching them things that were a little less complicated than this.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks again for joining us. Go read this on your own. And if this gets you interested in eschatology, which, by the way, means the study of end times.
Yeah, I've got it.
Then you know what? Go find some good books. And maybe start trying to learn about some of those things, and then come back and comment and tell us what we missed. But that's it. We'll see you guys next time with chapter 14.